Wish I hadn't seen this movie. I don't think it's very controversial to suggest Disney might be in their flop era right now. I mean, how do you somehow have your most depressing year for new releases while celebrating your 100th year anniversary? Seriously, you can't do that much worse than the CCP. And while others are quick to think of some dumb reactionary culture war reason for this, Twitter is down the hole to the right. It really is as simple as Disney just churning out bad content at an alarmingly fast rate and people are getting tired. Wish is a 100-year celebration of Disney and their classics, and the first revolutionary animated movie to be made entirely thanks to ChatGPT. And the crowd went so mild that an Adam Sandler movie managed to outperform it critically. Let's discuss. Big thank you to Disney for having a 2-day release gap for no reason. Now I can give a broader and advertiser-friendly reason for why I decided to pirate this film, instead of addressing the $2 million elephant in the room. So this title. What does it mean? Is Wish the worst thing Disney have ever released in the history of no, not even close? However, the reason why I say Wish is Disney's worst is because it's an amalgamation of plenty of Disney's worst qualities they have been developing for the past decade, and how they've grown complacent in utter mediocrity. This film highlights these things the most out of any of their recent releases. Let's break this movie down, starting with some more superficial stuff first before we get into the actual plot. But there's still pretty important aspects of the film, given its existence is apparently very significant as a 100-year celebration. Which brings me to my very first point, because oh my god, I hate you
never chew out. You're spitting, coughing up a lung, 'cause you're
King absolute, I'm gonna cry. One of the very first things that set people off about this movie was the animation. When the first trailer dropped, a lot of people had very similar reactions along the lines of, why the heck does it look like that? Needless to say, there was outrage. Many people started saying the movie looked bad and unfinished, and at first glance, compared to many of their previous movies, it certainly looked different. Disney and Pixar have been leading the uncanny mix of realism and cartoony designs trend ever since they murdered Treasure Planet, which I'm still upset about, by the way. And while I have my own issues with this style, it does still look serviceable, and in some instances, it can look genuinely impressive on a technical level. Even Strange World, Disney's major animated film, sorry, that's funny, from last year looked technically impressive in terms of lighting and detail, even if the characters fucking knows. So going from this to this was obviously going to result in some whiplash, but I was still taken aback by how unfinished the film looked from the trailers. This is because Wish, as a 100-year celebration of the company, blends aspects of Disney's traditional watercolor animation from their classics with their new age computer animation, a touching marriage of the old and the new, and finally doing what people have been asking Disney to do ever since Spider-Verse showed up the entire industry 5 years ago, blending 2D animation with 3D animation to create a unique visual identity and style. So I'm not really sure what happened here. To be clear, Wish doesn't look bad per se, and admittedly the compression of the trailer footage does not really help it, as it ruined a lot of the richer watercolor details that you can see perfectly fine otherwise. And in some areas the film does look pretty nice, but it really does look like a 3D animated movie with a watercolor filter over it. They do not take advantage of the usage of 2D elements at all. For all intents and purposes, this is still the same 3D animation style Disney have stuck to for over a decade, just with less detail and some really flat lighting. At nighttime, the lighting looks pretty good, but the daytime scenes really do look like test renders. When people said they wanted Disney to shake up their visuals more, that requires more effort than just dashing in some watercolor. Take advantage of the 2D elements, don't just use it as dressing for your 3D animation because it's simply not going to work as well. There was also a decent bit of controversy over the film's decision to be 3D animated at all, given that originally it was intended to be fully traditionally animated. Let me repeat that. Fully traditionally animated. Do you know how long it's been since we got a fully traditionally animated Disney movie? 14 years. And guess what? It still holds up magnificently, because not only do traditionally animated Disney movies look spectacular regardless of age, there's just so much more you can do with 2D animation when it comes to visuals and expressions. Like, the sky is quite literally the limit. That isn't to say 3D animation can't accomplish great things when pushed to its limits, but there's a reason why people have been clamoring for a 2D animated Disney movie for so long. They and given Wish is supposed to be a celebration of 100 years of Disney, it just makes sense for it to be traditionally animated, to pay tribute to the foundations of this company, to follow in the footsteps of the classics people love, a true celebration of Disney's roots. I keep looking at so many parts of this movie and imagining how gorgeous it would have looked in 2D, instead of this cobbled together fusion of 3D animation and watercolor. But nah, 2D animation was completely thrown away due to limitations with camera movements and characterization, which is bitch-ass liar, for we had a skill issue. 2D animation animation is not easy. Animation is not easy. But ditching the idea of a traditionally animated movie for Disney's 100-year anniversary and citing your main reasons as it's too hard is, 2D animation has barely any limits, especially compared to 3D animation. This just feels like such a massive missed opportunity, and I don't doubt that it was harder to do in 2D, but out of any Disney movie, this should have been the one to get special treatment. Speaking of this movie not getting the special treatment, let's talk about the part that got the special treatment. The Lin-Manuel, the soundtrack. Oh, fuck, here's the beginning. Disney movie. Bad music.
Nope, stop talking, go to jail.
Wish is very unique amongst animated movies for being the first one to have song lyrics generated by AI. Disney's songs are iconic, even a lot of the ones from recent movies are pretty catchy and are some of the most memorable parts of their respective films, regardless of whatever genre of music they go for. Wish is just white woman music, the movie. I have no doubt there were talented people behind this soundtrack, but holy god, it is bad. Granted, it's not...
Remember my song in the swamp?
But it's still pretty damn bad, and again, considering the entire point of this film's existence, it's pretty important that this aspect should not suck at all. Each song in Wish is bland, forgettable pop music trash that you'd hear in the middle of summer when you walk past a family having a barbecue, not for a Disney movie. Nothing stands out, nothing has impact, and the lyrics, dear god. I'm not a musician or a lyricist by any means, but for God's sake, it doesn't take a Bob Dylan level of brilliance to see that I let you live here for free and I don't even charge you rent is the opposite of cooking. That is the wrong kind of cold. Bro, peep the name, I'm gonna cry. This is the villain song, by the way. A Disney villain song. You just don't screw these up unless you actually have a death wish, I'm sorry. Look at this rent-due-ass chorus. It's obviously difficult for me to play any songs as examples given this is YouTube and I'll be brought to John Disney's doorstep if I overstep any copyright boundaries, but nearly every Disney soundtrack before this movie is better. I am not exaggerating when I say this is one of the worst Disney soundtracks of all time. The only song I remember is the villain song, and it is not for the right reasons, believe me. I find it pointless to bring up better examples of Disney songs because anyone listening to this soundtrack for more than 5 seconds can tell that there's just no spark or pizzazz or just the soundtrack is ass! As much as I think Lin-Manuel Miranda is overrated, this feels like it was trying to replicate the success of Encanto's OST without actually understanding what made Encanto's OST enjoyable and popular. Miranda isn't exactly the greatest lyricist of all time, that's just a fact thanks to this atrocity. But he brought his own style to Encanto and made it work, whereas Wish just lacks any musical identity. It's incredibly half-baked, listenable at best, borderline cringe-inducing at the absolute worst. And again, I must stress, if you're celebrating 100 years of Disney, then put in the effort. We needed a much more bombastic, magical soundtrack for this, not this weird mix between all the bad Taylor Swift songs and Kids Bop.
Wonder why your mood swings down.
Oh yeah, spoilers. Wish was conceptualized as a celebration of Disney's centennial, but in trying to act as a tribute to the movies that came before, Wish's fatal flaw is that it does nothing to stand out and throws away the potential of its concept so quickly that it becomes an incredibly predictable, bland, formulaic, and most importantly, safe movie. This is Disney's main problem these days. They've been playing it safe for years now. Very rarely do you get a Disney film that takes actual risks or does anything new with its story. There are some great modern Disney films that manage to add their own spin, but it's only a spin. Disney's inability to innovate and improve upon their old storytelling formula, along with the success that their films appear to be generating regardless of quality, has put them in an awkward position where they aren't really bothered with trying new things. And with the declining interest and financial troubles Star Wars and the MCU are having these days, I assume they think it's best to just play it safe and not risk wasting any money. Just make a film that's perfectly marketable and easy for kids to enjoy. And to Wish's credit, the script is a script. It tells its story, it has its villain, it has the songs, it has the message. If you had a guideline on how to make a corporate, sterile Disney movie that offends no one, then you have it right here. But again, this movie is supposed to celebrate 100 years of Disney, and I think in trying to do that with the story, the film forgot to stand on its own 2 feet and struts around with no identity. Whereas other Disney films are based on fairy tales, Wish is a movie based on the films about those fairy tales, that builds its script off of the tropes those films are known for, and essentially goes on autopilot. The film is about the all too familiar and iconic part of Disney classics, wishes coming true, which I think is a great springboard for an interesting story that respects Disney's legacy while doing something new. But instead, if you've seen any Disney movie ever, then you can see everywhere this movie tries to go from a mile away. I, along with many, am happy that Wish doesn't have a twist villain like nearly every Disney film released in the last 10 years, and instead, King Magnifico is just a no-nonsense villain. Great. And he's The biggest problem with Magnifico is that while he clearly has an ego at the start of the film, he's not exactly villainous. Sure, he may be trying to selfishly cling to his power, but he's not outright malicious. In fact, at the start of the movie, he's downright reasonable in many areas. He keeps the kingdom safe, he keeps the people happy, and he grants wishes that he knows will keep the people of Rosas happy, instead of taking a chance on one that could, yes, put him at risk of losing his power, but also any that could ignite conflict. That's his responsibility as a leader. And while he's 100% manipulative and hoards the wishes he sees as dangerous, at the end of the day, he isn't necessarily doing anything wrong. At the start of the movie, that is, because as the plot progresses, they keep pushing him further and further into the role of being a villain, and it feels incredibly forced, to the point where in his desperation to stop a potential coup, he just becomes possessed by forbidden magic to keep people in line, stops becoming a layered character entirely, and just becomes a mad, shallow, and unoriginal villain. And yeah, his villain song sucks really bad. Other than Magnifico, none of the other characters are remotely interesting or even that likable. A lot of people have complained about Asha, the protagonist, being yet another example of Disney's adorkable problem for its protagonists, and I find it hard to disagree. There is nothing to this character other than very basic motivations and combining aspects of the previous characters who fit this description, but with none of what made them stand out. When she isn't spouting MCU dialogue at the beginning of the film, she's just an absolute personality vacuum towards the end. That's the most I can say about her other than the fact that I simply don't like her. Again, they do such a poor job of making the king look bad at the start of the movie that Asha ends up coming off as the unreasonable and unlikable one. Even though Magnifico clearly likes her and it seems like he may actually choose her as an apprentice, she flips out when he attempts to explain what he does with the wishes, doing what's best for the people and avoiding conflict, even if underneath that he's trying to maintain his power with minimal risk. It just feels like the thematic elements of the movie are doing all of the talking for Asha. The idea that wishes shouldn't be handled by others and that they should be what drive us to live and reach for the stars, yeah, I agree, but they do such a poor job at making Magnifico seem malicious and unreasonable here. And when it comes to other aspects of the film, it all feels cobbled together based on Disney tropes. Like, do we really need another talking animal sidekick? Like, even the way he gets thrown into the plot feels shoehorned and like it was done based on what they thought was the most appealing to the largest number of people. And let's talk about the actual ways this movie takes advantage of its reason for existing. References, callbacks. When it's not being the definition of a generic Disney movie for kids, it's relentlessly giving you cameos and references to Disney's classics, like with the friends who are based on the Seven Dwarfs, Magnifico straight up mentioning the stories of Peter Pan, Little Mermaid, and Mary Poppins, Peter Pan just showing up in one scene, the goat saying he wants to create Zootopia, Magnifico becomes the magic mirror from Snow White, Asha becomes the fairy godmother and becomes white. No better way to celebrate your history by showing off all of your previous accomplishments instead of crafting a new one. And by the way, I am aware that these are most likely nods to Disney's classics and not trying to be actual origin stories. However, when the creators have argued that this film is supposed to be about the origin of the iconic wishing star that has become synonymous with Disney's brand, these references can be wildly interpreted as some dumb like trying to tie every Disney film into a shared universe. And again, I don't know if that's the intent, but when you describe Asha as being a modern day fairy godmother and at the end have her assume the role of the fairy godmother, there are a good few conclusions people can come up with. And this is Wish's main problem. It hinges on Disney's history, the brand. It is a boring and formulaic film when it could have actively reached for the star it's literally about and given us a movie worthy of being called Disney's 100-year celebration. Instead, it settles for hollow mediocrity while acting as a highlight reel of aspects done better in far better films to come before it. Wish isn't a movie to me, it's a product. It represents everything wrong with current day Disney. Overly safe and predictable while constantly trying to remind you of their legacy and how great they used to be. But the tricks are running hollow of viewers now. Even if these movies keep being successful, something needs to change and Disney has got to start taking risks. There's only so long you can keep shuffling out mediocrity before general audiences start getting tired. These movies will eventually begin to produce diminishing returns. It's only a matter of time. And as a celebration of 100 years of Disney existing, I mean, this is just pathetic. I have no other words for this really. Play Yakuza or something.